The laughter hit her before the words did. It cracked across the bright afternoon air like a slap, sharp and humiliating, bouncing off the white tablecloths and polished glassware of the crowded restaurant. Her hands trembled, the small stack of bills almost slipping from her fingers as the man in the tailored charcoal suit leaned back in his chair and exaggerated the way she had pronounced a single word. Around him, others smirked, covering their mouths as though cruelty tasted sweet. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, Pure Kindness asks you to like, comment, share, and subscribe right now, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Her name was Samara Qureshi, 26 years old, with honey-brown skin and tired hazel eyes that carried years far heavier than her age. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight, low bun beneath the crisp white headband of her uniform. The green waitress dress she wore was neatly pressed but slightly faded at the seams, the hem brushing just below her knees. She had ironed it herself at dawn in the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother. It was the only uniform she owned. The restaurant glittered in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Crystal glasses shimmered like fragile crowns. The air smelled of rosemary, grilled salmon, and expensive cologne. Business executives filled the tables, discussing mergers and investments in voices heavy with confidence. It was a world that seemed to have been built specifically to remind someone like Samara that she did not belong. Her accent had always followed her like a shadow. A soft blend of rural syllables and careful English learned from borrowed library books. She had moved to the city 5 years ago after her father's textile shop collapsed under debt. He had suffered a stroke the following winter. Hospital bills replaced the shop sign above their door. Responsibility replaced her youth. Every shift at the restaurant felt like a silent audition. She memorized the menu in 3 languages. She practiced pronunciation while walking to work, whispering foreign dishes under her breath. She wanted to sound polished. She wanted to sound like she deserved to stand among marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But today, when she described the imported truffle oil special, a single syllable slipped. Just one. And the man in the charcoal suit seized it like a weapon. He was Armin Khoury, 42, tall and sharply groomed, his light brown hair slicked back with surgical precision. His jaw was angular, almost sculpted, and his blue eyes were cold in a way that suggested he had forgotten what uncertainty felt like. Around him sat investors and board members. He was known for acquisitions that crushed competitors without blinking. A self-made titan, as magazines described him. But no one ever wrote about the boy he once was, the son of immigrants who had buried his own accent so deeply he pretended it had never existed. As the laughter swelled, Samara felt her throat tighten. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Her fingers dug into the bills she was holding. She thought of her brother, Ayaan, 17, studying late into the night to win a scholarship. She thought of her father's trembling hand the day he told her he was sorry for not leaving more behind. She swallowed. She apologized. She forced a polite smile. But the laughter did not stop. Armin leaned forward, pointing at her as though she were a miscalculation on a balance sheet. His lips moved again, mimicking her pronunciation in a mocking rhythm. A few at the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. It was easier to laugh than to challenge power. Samara felt something fracture inside her, not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet, exhausted crack. For years she had bent herself smaller to fit into rooms like this. She had absorbed comments about her tone, her grammar, her background. She had convinced herself humility was strength. Yet standing there, in the bright cruelty of midday, she realized humility had slowly turned into silence. Her heart pounded. Her palms were damp. The sunlight through the windows felt suddenly harsh, exposing every insecurity she had tried to hide. She thought about quitting. She imagined placing the bills on the table and walking out, never looking back. But quitting meant losing the rent money. It meant risking Ayaan's future. It meant telling her father she could not endure. So instead, she straightened. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible. Her shoulders aligned. Her chin lifted a fraction. The trembling in her hands stilled. Something inside her shifted, not anger, but clarity. She had spent years studying business articles while others watched television. She listened to executive podcasts while washing dishes. She had taken free online courses at midnight. She knew margins, projections, leadership structures. She knew more than they assumed. When she spoke again, the restaurant seemed to pause. Her voice was calm, steady, deliberate. The softness of her accent remained, but now it carried control instead of apology. She began explaining the sourcing strategy behind the truffle oil, the sustainability certifications, the projected cost increase due to seasonal supply shifts in Southern Europe. She referenced market volatility and how premium dining establishments leveraged exclusivity during economic downturns. She outlined why the restaurant's pricing model actually reflected a long-term retention strategy rather than short-term profit spikes. There was no hesitation. No misplaced syllables. Only clarity. Armin's smirk faltered. His investors stopped smiling. One of them leaned in, eyes narrowing, as though recalculating everything he thought he understood. Samara continued, her tone no longer defensive but analytical. She discussed brand positioning. She mentioned recent hospitality trends and how customer perception influenced stock valuation for restaurant chains expanding into luxury markets. She wasn't performing. She was revealing. The sunlight shifted across the table, illuminating the shock spreading across their faces. Armin felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, recognition. Beneath her accent, beneath the uniform, he saw the reflection of a version of himself he had buried. A young man who had once been laughed at in a boardroom because of the way he rolled his R's. A man who decided cruelty was easier than vulnerability. The air felt different now. Samara finished her explanation and stood quietly, meeting his gaze without challenge, without fear. It was not defiance. It was dignity. For a long moment, no one spoke. Armin slowly lowered his hand from where it had been pointing at her. His jaw tightened. Around him, his colleagues avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their earlier amusement. The tension in the room thickened, not hostile, but transformative. Something had shifted in the hierarchy of that space. Samara felt her heartbeat gradually steady. She had expected retaliation, maybe even termination. Instead, she saw uncertainty flicker across Armin's face. His confidence wavered under the weight of her composure. The manager, who had watched nervously from a distance, stepped closer, but before he could intervene, Armin stood up. He studied her carefully. Not as a waitress. Not as a target. But as an equal. The afternoon light softened, bathing the room in a warm glow that felt almost symbolic. Conversations at nearby tables resumed in hushed tones. The world continued, but something irreversible had occurred. Armin reached into his jacket pocket, not for a dismissive tip, but for his business card. His movements were slower now, deliberate. The card trembled slightly between his fingers, a subtle reminder that power is often more fragile than it appears. Samara looked at it, then at him. In his eyes was something unexpected, humility. He had built an empire by projecting invincibility. But in that moment, he was simply a man confronted by the courage he once abandoned. The manager blinked in confusion. The investors exchanged looks. A few diners discreetly wiped at their eyes, moved by something they could not fully articulate. Near the ending of this story, if it has touched your heart, Pure Kindness asks you again to support it by liking, sharing, and subscribing, because compassion deserves a platform. Before the final moment unfolds, tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were standing in Samara's place. Samara accepted the card, not with gratitude, but with grace. She did not bow her head. She did not shrink. She simply nodded, acknowledging opportunity without surrendering dignity. The restaurant returned